What happens when power-drunk cops pick the wrong target in a crowded bar, only to realize the women they try to break are actually FBI agents watching everything. That night, two black twins walked in looking like anyone else unwinding after work, and the officers who marked them as easy prey had no idea they were stepping straight into their own downfall. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The bar sat on the corner of a busy Dallas street, its neon sign flickering faintly against the warm Texas evening as laughter and music spilled out through the open doors. Inside, amber lights washed over polished wood and worn leather stools, giving the place a comfortable, lived-in feel where regulars came to forget long days and short tempers. Valerie Sterling stepped in first, her posture relaxed but deliberate, her eyes taking in a room in a single quiet sweep that most people would never notice. Behind her, Vanessa followed at an even pace, her expression composed, almost unreadable, as if nothing in the world could rush her or shake her balance. To anyone watching, they looked like sisters enjoying a night out, maybe professionals blowing off steam, maybe just passing through. Their clothes were simple, fitted jeans, neutral tops, nothing flashy, nothing that demanded attention. And yet there was something about the way they moved, controlled, efficient, as if every step had already been considered before it was taken. They chose seats at the bar without hesitation, back straight but not rigid, positioning themselves where they could see both the entrance and the mirror behind the liquor shelves. Valerie rested her elbow lightly against the counter, ordering 2 drinks in a calm, even tone, while Vanessa glanced briefly at the crowd, cataloging faces, exits, and movements with the kind of precision that came from years of training no one in the room could see. The bartender nodded, sliding glasses across the counter as country music blended with low conversation and the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby table. For a moment, everything felt ordinary. Valerie allowed herself a small exhale, the kind that signaled a temporary pause rather than true relaxation, while Vanessa tapped her fingers once against the glass, a subtle rhythm that matched her steady breathing. Around them, patrons talked, clinked glasses, and checked their phones, unaware that the atmosphere, though calm on the surface, had already begun to shift. Because across the room, near the far end of the bar where the lighting dimmed just enough to hide sharper expressions, 2 men had taken notice. And the quiet night, balanced so carefully on routine and familiarity, was about to tilt into something far more dangerous than anyone there was prepared for. Officer Ryan Harkins leaned back against the far end of the bar, his fingers drumming slowly against the polished wood as his gaze locked onto the twins with a kind of deliberate intensity that was anything but casual. Beside him, Officer Luke Brenner tilted his glass back, finishing the last of his drink before setting it down with a dull thud, his eyes narrowing as he followed Harkins's line of sight. "You see that?" Harkins muttered, his voice low but edged with something sharp, something already decided. Brenner let out a quiet grunt, rolling his shoulders as if loosening up before a task. "Yeah," he replied, lips curling slightly, "don't recognize them." Harkins's jaw tightened, a slow tension building beneath his skin as he watched Valerie laugh softly at something Vanessa said, the sound light, unbothered, completely out of place in his mind. "Exactly," he said, pushing himself off the bar with a controlled motion. "They don't belong here." The words hung in the air for a second before he started moving, his steps measured but heavy, boots striking the wooden floor with a rhythm that cut through the background noise just enough to draw subtle glances from nearby patrons. Brenner followed half a step behind, his posture wider, more aggressive, his shoulders angled outward as if already claiming space that was not his. At the counter, Valerie's fingers paused briefly around her glass, not tightening, not flinching, just still for a fraction of a second before she resumed her relaxed grip. Vanessa's eyes shifted, catching their reflection in the mirror behind the bar long before they arrived, her expression unchanged, but her attention now fully engaged. Harkins stopped just close enough to invade their space without touching, his presence looming, his shadow stretching across the counter between them. "Evening," he said, the word drawn out in a tone that carried no warmth, only inspection. Valerie turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. With calm precision. "Evening, officer," she replied, her voice smooth, measured, offering respect without submission. That seemed to irritate him more than defiance would have. Brenner stepped in closer, positioning himself near Vanessa's side, his arm resting casually on the back of her stool, though the angle made it clear it was not casual at all. "Mind telling us what you two are doing here?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough volume to attract attention from those nearby. Vanessa did not immediately respond. She let the silence stretch just long enough to make his question feel smaller than he intended, then turned her head slightly toward him. "Having a drink," she said simply, her tone even, her eyes steady. Brenner's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like a reaction to something he did not like. Harkins leaned in a fraction, his gaze moving over Valerie's face, then down to her hands, then back up again, searching for something he could use. "You from around here?" he pressed, his voice tightening, each word carrying more weight than necessary. Valerie set her glass down gently, the soft clink echoing louder than it should have. "We're just passing through," she answered, her posture unchanged, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady. Harkins's nostrils flared slightly, his fingers curling once at his side before relaxing again. The calm, the lack of fear, the refusal to shrink under his presence. It unsettled him in a way he could not quite explain, and that discomfort began to twist into something sharper. Around them, conversations began to quiet, heads turning just enough to watch without appearing to stare. The air shifted, not heavy, not obvious, but unmistakably different, like the first crack of tension before a storm fully breaks, and standing at the center of it, Harkins made a decision that would push everything past the point of no return. Harkins straightened slowly, the decision settling over him like a switch being flipped, his expression hardening into something far less restrained. "All right," he said, his voice louder now, cutting clean through the low hum of the bar. "Let's make this simple. I need to see some identification." The request was not a request at all. It landed heavy, deliberate, meant to assert control rather than gather information. Valerie did not reach for a purse. Instead, she turned her body slightly toward him, her movements unhurried, her eyes steady and unblinking. "Is there a reason for that?" she asked, her tone calm, not challenging, but precise, each word placed carefully. Brenner let out a short breath through his nose, stepping closer to Vanessa, his presence tightening around her like a closing circle. "Reason," he echoed, his voice rising just enough to draw more attention. "Yeah, you're acting suspicious." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her gaze flicking to him for a brief second before returning forward. "Sitting at a bar and ordering a drink is suspicious now?" she asked, her voice even, almost quiet, but it carried. A few patrons nearby shifted in their seats, the tension pulling their attention whether they wanted it or not. Harkins's jaw clenched, the muscles along his cheek tightening, as if he were chewing on something bitter. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, his tone sharpening. His hand moved to rest on his belt, thumb hooking near his radio in a gesture that was more about intimidation than necessity. Valerie noticed it, her eyes flicking down for the briefest moment before returning to his face. "We're not causing any trouble," she said, her voice still controlled, still measured. "We're just trying to enjoy our evening." That word, enjoy, seemed to irritate him further. His shoulders squared, his stance widening slightly as he leaned in just enough to push into her space. "That's not for you to decide," he replied, his voice dropping lower now, but heavier, more forceful. Brenner shifted behind Vanessa, his hand brushing the back of her stool, not quite touching her yet, but close enough to make the intent clear. "Go ahead," he added, gesturing with 2 fingers. "Let's see your IDs." Vanessa's fingers rested lightly against the edge of the counter, unmoving, her posture unchanged. She did not reach for anything. Instead, she looked straight ahead, her voice calm, almost detached. "We haven't done anything that requires identification," she said. The sentence was simple, but it landed like a boundary drawn in clear, unmistakable lines. For a moment, there was silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that stretched tight, thin as wire. Harkins's eyes narrowed, something darker flickering behind them now. Something that had moved past curiosity into irritation, and from irritation into something more dangerous. "You refusing a lawful request?" he asked, his voice rising again, louder, more aggressive, designed to force compliance through. "Pressure." Valerie exhaled slowly, the movement subtle, controlled. "I'm asking what law requires it," she replied, her tone unchanged, her gaze unwavering. That was the moment it shifted. The last thin thread of restraint in Harkins's posture snapped. His hand came off his belt, pointing sharply toward her, his voice cutting through the room with unmistakable authority. "Stand up," he ordered, each word hard, final, leaving no space for interpretation. Around them, conversations stopped completely now. Glasses hovered midair, heads turned openly, no longer pretending not to watch. And yet, Valerie did not move. She simply looked at him, calm, steady, as if she had already seen exactly where this was going and was waiting for him to take the next step. Valerie held Harkins's gaze without blinking, her stillness more defiant than any raised voice could have been, and for a split second, that silence challenged him in a way he could not tolerate. His hand shot forward, gripping her wrist with sudden force, fingers tightening as he tried to yank her off the stool. "I said stand up," he barked, his voice sharp enough to make someone near the end of the bar flinch. The movement was abrupt, unnecessary, and meant to assert dominance. But Valerie did not resist in the way he expected. She rose smoothly with the pull, not stumbling, not struggling, her balance controlled, her posture straightening the moment her feet touched the ground. That lack of resistance seemed to irritate him even more. "You think this is a game?" he muttered, leaning closer, his breath heavy with alcohol and authority. "You don't get to question me." Beside them, Brenner's patience snapped in a different direction. His hand came down onto Vanessa's shoulder, not light, not casual, but firm, pressing down as if to pin her in place. "Your turn," he said, his voice low and edged up. Vanessa's eyes shifted slowly toward his hand, then back to his face. For a brief moment, she said nothing. Then, with deliberate control, she stood on her own, stepping forward just enough to remove his grip without force, without confrontation. It was a quiet refusal to be handled, and Brenner felt it. His jaw tightened, and he stepped closer again, crowding her space, his chest nearly brushing her shoulder. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he warned, though the warning carried more threat than reason. Around them, the bar had gone nearly silent. The music still played, but it felt distant now, like it belonged to another room entirely. A glass clinked somewhere in the background, too loud in the tension, and someone near the door shifted uneasily, glancing toward the exit as if considering leaving. Harkins twisted Valerie's wrists slightly behind her back, not enough to injure, but enough to force compliance, enough to make a point. "You're both acting real bold for people who don't belong here," he said, his voice rising again, letting the words carry, letting others hear. Valerie's face remained composed, though her arm was now held at an angle that would have made most people wince. "You're crossing a line," she said quietly, not a threat, not a plea, just a statement of fact. Harkins scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "I'm a line," he shot back, tightening his grip for emphasis. Brenner mirrored the escalation, stepping behind Vanessa and placing a firm hand against the middle of her back, guiding, no, pushing her a half step forward. "We're going to do this the easy way," he said, though his tone suggested he preferred otherwise. Vanessa allowed the step, her balance adjusting instantly, her eyes scanning the room once, quickly, taking in the growing number of phones being subtly raised, the shifting attention, the witnesses. She did not panic. She did not rush. She simply breathed, slow and even. Harkins began reaching toward his cuffs, the metallic glint catching the bar light as his fingers brushed against them. His movements deliberate now, committed. "You two just made this a whole lot worse for yourselves," he said, each word heavier than the last. And still, neither Valerie nor Vanessa raised their voices. Neither pulled away. Neither gave him the reaction he was hunting for. They stood there, calm in the center of the storm he was creating, as if they already knew exactly how it would end, even if he did not. The faint glint of the cuffs in Harkins's hand caught the light as he pulled them free with a sharp, practiced motion. The sound of metal shifting against metal cutting through the silence like a warning no one could ignore. "Turn around," he ordered, his voice firm, final, already assuming compliance. Valerie did not move immediately. She let a single breath pass, slow and controlled, her eyes steady on his. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, her tone unchanged, not raised, not emotional, but grounded in certainty. That only fueled him. "No." Harkins snapped, stepping closer and forcing her arm higher behind her back, angling her shoulder forward. "You already made the mistake." With that, he pushed her just enough to turn her, his grip tightening as he positioned her wrists. The click of the first cuff snapping shut around her wrist rang out clearly, drawing a visible reaction from a man seated a few stools away, who quickly looked down, pretending not to see. Brenner moved at the same time, his patience gone, his restraint replaced with something rougher. His hand pressed firmly between Vanessa's shoulder blades, pushing her forward toward the bar with more force than necessary. "Hands behind your back," he demanded, his voice louder now, feeding off the attention, feeding off the control. Vanessa complied without resistance, her movements precise, her wrists coming together behind her, as if she had done this before, as if the position did not intimidate her at all. Brenner grabbed her wrists, pulling them slightly upward as he secured the cuffs, the metal locking with a sharp, final snap. "That's better," he muttered, though there was no satisfaction in it. Only irritation that she had not fought, had not given him a reason to escalate further. Around them, phones were no longer subtle. Several patrons held them openly now, recording, their faces tense, uncertain, caught between fear and disbelief. The bartender stood frozen behind the counter, a towel in his hand, eyes flicking between the officers and the twins, clearly weighing whether to intervene and deciding against it. Harkins turned Valerie back toward the room, one hand gripping her upper arm now, firm and controlling. "Disturbing the peace," he announced loudly, projecting his voice so the entire bar could hear, as if the charge alone could justify everything that had just happened. Valerie's expression did not change. "We were sitting quietly," she said, her voice steady despite the pressure on her arm. Harkins leaned closer, his face inches from hers, his eyes narrowing. "Not anymore," he replied coldly. Brenner gave Vanessa a small shove forward, guiding her away from the bar. The movement was controlled, but forceful enough to make a nearby chair scrape loudly against the floor. "Let's go," he said, already steering her toward the exit. Vanessa adjusted her balance instantly, her steps steady, her posture still composed despite the restraints. As they began moving, the crowd parted instinctively, people stepping back, clearing a path without being told. No one spoke. No one stepped in. The weight of authority, even when misused, was enough to silence them all. And yet, as Valerie and Vanessa were pushed forward, side by side, neither showed fear, neither struggled, neither raised their voices. They walked with a quiet, controlled dignity that did not match the scene unfolding around them. It was not the behavior of victims caught off guard. It was the stillness of people who knew something the others did not. And as Harkins tightened his grip, leading them toward the door with growing confidence, he failed to notice that the situation was no longer under his control at all. The night air outside the bar felt cooler, quieter, but the tension followed them like a shadow that refused to lift. Harkins pushed the door open with his shoulder, guiding Valerie forward with a firm grip on her arm, while Brenner kept close behind Vanessa, steering her toward the curb where their patrol car sat under the glow of a flickering streetlight. The sounds of the bar faded behind them, replaced by the distant hum of traffic and the faint buzz of electricity from overhead lines. For a moment, everything slowed. This was the point where it usually ended. Paperwork, a ride to the station, another name added to a report that no one would question. Harkins adjusted his hold, repositioning Valerie so she faced the car, his hand pressing between her shoulder blades as he prepared to search her. "You made this real easy for me," he said, his voice lower now, more controlled, the edge of performance gone, replaced by quiet satisfaction. "All you had to do was cooperate." Valerie stood still, her wrists secure behind her, her breathing steady, her posture unchanged. She turned her head just slightly, enough for her voice to carry without raising it. "This is your last chance to stop," she said. The words were calm, almost gentle, but there was something beneath them, something solid and unshakable that did not belong to someone in her position. Harkins let out a short, dismissive laugh, shaking his head as if amused by the audacity. "You really think you're in a position to give me chances?" he replied, tightening his grip slightly as he spoke. Behind them, Brenner leaned Vanessa forward against the side of the patrol car, one hand pressing against her back as he reached for his radio with the other. "Dispatch," he began, his tone casual, routine. "We've got 2 females detained, possible disorderly conduct, bringing them in." Vanessa did not resist the pressure against her back. She allowed the position, her cheek turned slightly toward the cold metal of the vehicle, her eyes focused somewhere beyond the immediate moment. "You should cancel that call," she said quietly. Brenner paused for half a second, just long enough for the words to register, then scoffed under his breath. "Yeah," he muttered, pressing the radio closer to his mouth. "And why would I do that?" Vanessa's lips moved again, her voice still level, still controlled. "Because once that call goes through, this doesn't stay local anymore." The statement hung there, subtle but heavy with implication. Harkins glanced briefly in their direction, his brow tightening for just a fraction of a second before his expression hardened again. "Listen to this," he said with a smirk, turning his attention back to Valerie. "Now you're making threats." Valerie shook her head slightly, the movement minimal but deliberate. "Not a threat," she replied. "A warning." Harkins's smile sharpened, his patience gone, his pride now fully in control. He reached for his radio, his thumb pressing down on the transmit button with a firm, decisive motion. "Dispatch, confirm transport," he said, his voice clear, authoritative, locking the moment into place. It was a choice, simple and final. The last opportunity to step back, ignored without hesitation. And as the radio crackled to life with a response, neither officer noticed the subtle shift in the air around them. The kind of shift that comes just before everything changes, just before the consequences of a single decision begin to unfold. The radio crackled in Harkins's hand, dispatch beginning to respond, but the words never fully landed because at that exact moment, Vanessa shifted her head slightly and spoke again, her voice no longer quiet, no longer subtle, but clear, controlled, and carrying a weight that did not belong to someone in handcuffs. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said, each word precise, deliberate. "Special Agent Vanessa Sterling. Badge and credentials are in my left jacket pocket." The effect was immediate, though not loud. It was not an explosion, not a sudden movement, but something far more unsettling. Harkins froze. Not completely, not at first, but just enough for the rhythm of his breathing to break. His thumb eased off the radio without him realizing it. Brenner's hand, still pressed against Vanessa's back, lost its firmness, the pressure softening as if his body had forgotten how much force to apply. "What?" Harkins said, the words slipping out before he could stop it, his voice no longer sharp, no longer commanding, but uncertain. Valerie turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his, steady, unshaken. "You heard her," she said calmly. "Special Agent Valerie Sterling." The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. It pressed in from all sides, swallowing the distant traffic, muting the hum of the streetlight above them. Brenner stepped back half a pace without meaning to, his hand dropping from Vanessa's back as if it had been burned, though there was no heat, only realization creeping in, slow and suffocating. No, he started, but the words did not form. His eyes flicked to Harkins, searching for direction, for denial, for anything that could undo what had just been said. But Harkins did not answer. He was staring at Valerie now, really looking at her for the first time, not as a target, not as a problem to control, but as something else entirely. Something he had misjudged. His grip on her arm loosened, not fully released, but no longer certain. "You're lying," he said finally, though the conviction was gone, replaced by something brittle, something that cracked at the edges. Valerie did not react to the accusation. She simply nodded once toward her jacket. "Then check," she said. No defiance, no challenge, just an invitation. Brenner hesitated, his hand hovering uncertainly before reaching toward Vanessa's pocket. His movements were slower now, careful, as if the air itself had changed. When his fingers slipped inside and pulled out a leather case, the world seemed to narrow around that single object. He opened it, and everything stopped. The badge caught the light first, gold flashing under the street lamp, followed by the identification beneath it, crisp, unmistakable, official in a way that could not be faked. Not like this. Brenner's face drained of color, his mouth parting slightly as his eyes scanned the credentials again. As if repetition might change what he was seeing. It did not. "Ryan," he said, his voice low, strained, nothing like the man who had been laughing minutes ago. Harkins did not move right away. Then, slowly, he released Valerie's arm completely, the space between them widening as if pulled apart by an invisible force. The radio slipped from his hand, hanging loosely at his side. His eyes flicked from the badge to Valerie's face, then back again, the pieces finally aligning in a way he could not ignore. The certainty he had carried just moments ago collapsed, replaced by something colder, heavier. Fear. And for the first time that night, the control he thought he held was gone, leaving him standing in the exact position he had forced them into, exposed and with no way back. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of the revelation hung in the air like a verdict already passed. And then, in the distance, the low rumble of engines cut through the silence. Harkins's head snapped toward the sound, his pulse quickening as a line of black SUVs turned onto the street with purpose, their headlights slicing through the night. They did not slow. They did not hesitate. They stopped hard along the curb, doors opening in near perfect unison as dark-suited agents stepped out, their movements sharp, controlled, undeniable. The shift in power was instant and absolute. "Hands where I can see them," one of the agents commanded, his voice carrying authority that did not need to be forced. Harkins froze completely this time, his hands lifting almost instinctively, the radio slipping from his grip and clattering against the pavement. Brenner took a step back, his breathing uneven now, his eyes darting between the agents and the badge still open in his hand, as if hoping this could still be undone. It could not. Two agents moved in quickly, one stepping between Valerie and Harkins, the other securing Brenner's arms with firm, practiced precision. The same cuffs that had moments ago symbolized control now snapped shut around Brenner's wrists, the sound sharp and final. "You are being detained for interference with a federal investigation and unlawful arrest," the agent stated, his tone calm, almost routine, as if this outcome had been inevitable from the start. Harkins opened his mouth, but no words came out. His earlier confidence had drained completely, leaving behind a hollow uncertainty that showed in the way his shoulders had dropped, in the way his stance no longer held ground but searched for it. I didn't know," he managed finally, his voice thin, unsteady. Valerie stepped forward now, her cuffs already removed by another agent, her wrists free as she rolled them once, not in pain, but in acknowledgement of what had just been done. "That's the problem," she said, her voice level, her gaze fixed on him. "You didn't bother to find out." Around them, the scene had drawn a crowd from the bar, people gathering at the doorway, phones raised, capturing every second of the reversal. The same silence that had protected Harkins minutes ago now worked against him, heavy with judgment, with realization. Brenner's face had gone pale, his earlier aggression replaced with a stunned stillness as he was guided toward one of the SUVs. "Please, this doesn't have to go this far," he muttered, but even he sounded like he did not believe it. Vanessa stood beside Valerie now, her cuffs removed, her posture unchanged, her composure intact. "It already has," she replied quietly. Another agent approached Harkins, turning him around with firm hands, securing his wrists behind his back in a motion that mirrored exactly what he had done moments earlier. The symmetry was undeniable, the consequence unavoidable. "You are relieved of duty pending federal charges," the agent said as he led him toward the vehicle. Harkins did not resist. He could not. The street, once just another routine stop, had become a stage for accountability, and every step he took now was heavier than the last, each one carrying the full weight of his choices as the doors of the SUV closed behind him, sealing the moment that ended everything he thought he controlled. The doors of the SUVs closed with a heavy finality, the sound echoing down the quiet street as the engines idled for only a moment before pulling away one by one, their presence fading as quickly as it had arrived. The flashing lights disappeared around the corner, taking Harkins and Brenner with them, leaving behind a stillness that felt entirely different from the tension that had filled the air just minutes before. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The crowd gathered at the entrance of the bar remained frozen, phones still raised, as if unsure whether the moment had truly ended. Then, slowly, the energy shifted. Conversations began again in hushed tones, heads shaking, eyes wide with disbelief, the weight of what they had just witnessed settling in. Valerie adjusted the sleeve of her jacket with a small, precise motion, her posture returning to its natural ease as if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a brief interruption. Beside her, Vanessa glanced once down the street where the vehicles had vanished, then back toward the bar, her expression composed, untouched by the chaos that had unfolded. One of the federal agents approached them, his demeanor respectful, his voice low. "We have everything we need," he said. "Internal affairs will handle the rest." Valerie gave a slight nod, not out of acknowledgement of authority, but of process, of order being restored. "Make sure the footage from inside is secured," she replied calmly. There were multiple witnesses. The agent nodded once and stepped back, already turning to coordinate with the others. The twins stood there for a moment longer, the quiet stretching around them, no longer heavy, but calm, almost reflective. The same streetlight that had illuminated the confrontation now cast a softer glow, no longer harsh, no longer interrogative. From the doorway, the bartender stepped forward hesitantly, wiping his hands on a cloth, his earlier uncertainty replaced with something closer to respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice careful, "your drinks are still inside on the house." Valerie glanced at him, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips, not of amusement, but of appreciation for a small gesture of normalcy. "Thank you," she said simply. They walked back toward the bar, not as suspects, not as targets, but as exactly who they had been all along, composed, self-assured, and entirely in control. As they stepped inside, the room parted again, but this time it was different. There was no fear, no avoidance, only quiet acknowledgement, a respect that did not need to be spoken aloud. Valerie picked up her glass, the liquid inside barely disturbed, and took a slow sip, her eyes scanning the room once more, not for threats, but out of habit. Vanessa leaned lightly against the counter, her presence steady, grounded, as if the storm had passed and left nothing but clarity behind. Outside, the city continued as it always did, unaware of the precise moment justice had quietly rebalanced itself on. A single street corner, and inside that bar, under warm amber lights, two women returned to their evening, not needing recognition, not seeking attention, because the only thing that mattered had already been restored. Control had shifted, truth had surfaced, and the silence that followed was no longer fear, but peace.